The third season of Supergirl premiered October 9th, 2017. Being its third season, the show had overcome its growing pains, settling into a comfortable status quo. Does this mean things got better? Well, in a few ways, yes. In other ways, no. A status quo is really only a good thing if the formula is solid. Without a solid formula, though, the regular can quickly become monotonous. No major character from the previous season departed in the hiatus, meaning that despite the show's efforts, we know that Mon-El is coming back. Also coming back is Kara's mom, who has been recast as Erica Durance. 3 newcomers are added to what I would consider the major character class. Carl Lumbly as Marin, Oda Annabelle as Samantha Arias, and Emma Tremblay as Ruby Arias. Though both of the latter actresses are mostly white, this is Latina representation, as Annabelle's parents were Cuban and Colombian, and Tremblay is a quarter Chilean. Though this season is far from great when it comes to representation, at least they didn't cast a tan non-Latina like they did with Maggie. It is weird though because, well, we'll get into it. Episode 1 shows us that Kara is still sad about Mon-El's departure, putting all of her time into being Supergirl. This leads her to be reckless and distant. She throws a non-powered human a football field's length onto a car, don't worry, he's just fine, and she's impersonal with the people that she saves. Lena, who has been promoted to main character this season, gets an antagonist of her own with Adrian Pasdar's Morgan Edge. Rather than the complex business mogul from the comics who operated as a generally helpful boss at a TV station, a member of the criminal underworld, and a servant to Darkseid's army, Morgan Edge is a bland right-wing real estate mogul that uses liberal as an insult and ultimately has no character beyond that. He's also, like Huntress in the Birds of Prey movie, another case of reverting a character that was made black in the comics to their white origin. But Edge's portrayal pales in comparison to the butchering of Bloodsport. Robert Dubois, in the comics, is an incredibly tragic character. Drafted into the Vietnam War, Robert fled to Canada, leaving his brother to go in his place. When his brother lost all 4 of his limbs, Robert was plagued with survivor's guilt, spending time in multiple psychiatric hospitals. However, Lex Luthor took him, gave him a weapon that could become anything he wanted, manipulated on his mental anguish, and threw him into Metropolis with instructions to kill Superman. With little grasp on his sanity, Dubois convinced himself that he had also gone to Vietnam and lost his limbs alongside his brother. He took out his pain on over 25 civilians until his brother, Mickey, came to him and begged him to let the pain of the war end. Dubois surrendered and was somberly taken to a mental hospital in America. However, when the hospital lost its funding, he was prematurely declared stable and moved to a penitentiary with a large white supremacist population. Facing racist abuse on the regular, the unsympathetic warden organizes a boxing match between Dubois and the second Bloodsport, another white supremacist. The neo-Nazis start a riot attacking Superman and try to kill Dubois. He manages to steal one of their weapons and escapes, but the prison guards see him, unarmed, and kill him, even though Superman was right behind him. In interest of good taste, I will not show the panel, but it really is quite tragic. Ultimately, despite being a minor villain, Dubois was sobering commentary on the way that the American justice system and American war machines treat mental patients, as well as the intersectionality found when these mental patients are black. Dubois could have been the best villain on a comic TV show ever if his story was told well. In Supergirl, he's a veteran-turned-mercenary with no personality at all, no story related to race or mental health, and is brutalized by Supergirl before being arrested, never to be mentioned again. Maggie and Alex are preparing to get married, but Maggie doesn't want a big wedding. Something about not being close to her father. Does this mean what I think it means? We also meet Sam, who saves her daughter using superpowers she didn't know she had. Ultimately, Kara decides to go back to her life at Catco, now run by Lena. Episode 2 sets up some tension, as it's revealed that Alex wants kids, but Maggie doesn't. This is ideally something you would talk about before getting engaged, but as it's a genuine source of actual drama, it's a welcome change for these two. It's also revealed that Lena, who told us last season she never had any friends that she could trust, who said everyone distrusted her because of her last name, who acted like Kara was the first friend that she ever had, is best friends with Sam, and seen as an aunt to Ruby. Sam is named new CFO, Sai is the villain of the week, and she makes Kara sad and scared as she thinks Mon-El may have died. Episode 3 is half amazing and half horrible. On the amazing side, we meet Jean's father, Mirren, once again played by Carl Lumbly, who is the voice of the Martian Manhunter from Justice League, and he is amazing in this role, and, thankfully, recurring. David Harewood plays wonderfully off from him, and they're probably the best part of this season. Terribly, we meet Maggie's father, a Mexicano immigrant played by white European-American Carlos Bernard. Oscar Rodas, as he's called, is deeply homophobic, like can't even be in the same room as his daughter after she kisses a woman, throws her out of the house at 14 years old homophobic. What is it with the Arrowverse's writers' obsession with homophobic parents of color? Oscar Rodas, a supposedly Latino man written by 2 white authors, is homophobic to his daughter. Diane Moore, a black woman written by a Persian author, is homophobic to her daughter. Rachel Gould, a supposedly East Asian man written by 2 white authors, is homophobic to his daughter. Parker Torres' parents, written by a white author, are homophobic to their daughter. Curtis Holt's mother, written by a white author, is homophobic to her son. Meanwhile, white characters routinely get supportive, loving parents. I recognize a good portion of the higher-ups at the Arrowverse are gay, but they're mostly white and are invested in portraying older people of color as homophobic and older white people as tolerant. This is about as obviously racist as racism can get. Black Lightning and Flash are, as usual, better than the other shows in this regard, as both Iris West and the Pierces are really good supportive parents. But Batwoman, Arrow, and Supergirl really need to learn to stay in their lane. White people have enough homophobic family members to deal with, and we're better off letting gay people of color call out homophobes of color of their respective race. They know better how to do it without relying on racism. The same goes for non-black people trying to go out of their way to attack black people. Obviously, if a person of color is directly homophobic to you, go for it, but otherwise you should be boosting queer voices of color rather than trying to speak for them. This is the reason I don't talk about intraracial colorism or misogyny from men of color. Not because it doesn't exist, but because I'm not qualified to accurately assess it and address how things can change. And likewise, the white and non-black authors of the Arrowverse aren't able to address homophobia in black and Latino communities without resulting to stereotypes. On top of this, a white director, 2 white authors, and 2 white actors thought it was okay to use a racial slur to illustrate why homophobia is wrong. Also, they say that this president hates Latinos, but in this universe, the president is Latina, unlike any of the people actually involved in the making of this scene. This is probably the worst part of this season. Episode 4 introduces a really cool idea with the Cult of Rao, a group of Kryptonian-worshipping humans. There's some good stuff with the pros and cons on religion, and some creepy stuff with the cult leader knowing who Supergirl is. There's also some weird stuff where after meeting Sam once, Alex and Maggie say that they're now cool aunts to Ruby. Was there a deleted scene that we missed or something? Also, Anjali J, an actress that I really like, debuts on the show, but she's a robot for a while. Episode 5 has Maggie and Alex break up, unable to change their opinions on whether they want children. Maggie leaves the show, never to, at least as of yet, return. Great job for being a cool aunt to Ruby. We also have more being rich is good. The water has been poisoned in National City, and people blame Lena Luthor. She's innocent, but we get chants of lock her up and references to Flint, Michigan. Lena blames Flint's lead poisoning on bureaucracy, which is partly true, but let's not pretend that wealthy people are chomping at the bit to fix problems when the government stops them, as this show pretends is the case. Lena finds out that Morgan Edge is guilty, draws a gun on him instead of going to the police, and he escapes scot-free. I mean, so does she, so only the kids with lead poisoning lose in this one. James and Lena also begin to like each other. Episode 6 is called Midvale, and it's basically the Smallville episode, complete with a very creepy in hindsight reference to Chloe Sullivan. Creepier still, we get a rapist teacher and a child murderer cop. We also find out that Kara had a crush on an Asian boy in school, but he was, of course, murdered to motivate her. Next we have Wake Up, episode 7, but before we get into that, let's talk about Lois and Clark. What makes a romantic relationship in fiction work? One of the most famous ideas is will they, won't they? And while on occasion I can enjoy that, there's a bit of a difference between the ways different stories go about it. In my opinion, Lois and Clark has one of the best will they, won't theys in fiction. Part of this is because everything that makes them come together or drift apart is something you can understand. None of their obstacles are insurmountable, but they're understandably difficult. Without spoiling anything, as you really should give it a try, every problem they have is something you understand causing tension, but also can see them overcoming. One in particular is when it is discovered that Clark was, before he was adopted, without his consent obviously, pledged to be wed to a Kryptonian woman. Though he has to help these Kryptonians, he never wishes to be with her, never sleeps with her, and he supports her desire to be with the man that she loves, despite class differences. It's an awkward situation to be sure, but not one Lois and Clark can't move beyond. In Wake Up, we find that Mon-El is still alive, on Earth, having traveled to the future, spent several years there, and married Imra Ardeen, played by the race-faking Amy Jackson, a white British actress best known for pretending to be Indian and supporting Bollywood's colorism, by her own admission. The dislikability of the actress aside, though, Mon-El and Imra time-traveled back to the present, and for the remainder of the season, we are supposed to be interested in the will they won't they of Mon-El and Kara. Mon-El, a man that is married to a woman that he claims he loves, and Kara, a woman he knew for a few months more than half a decade ago. Even people that liked Mon-El and Kara together were less than thrilled by this. Some things can be overcome, sure, but the show wants us to be interested in a will they won't they that would be contingent upon breaking up a happy marriage. This episode also reveals that Sam is actually Kryptonian. This does mean that, again, the Latina actress is playing an illegal alien, but at least she's as human as Kara, Clark, and the rest of the Kryptonians are. It's unclear if the character is Latina, but I suppose that's up to each individual Latina viewer to decide if they consider a representation or not. Also, she's possessed by her evil alter ego now, and Anjali Jay's character, an adaptation of Selena from the Helen Slater movie, is guiding her through her evil. This is something that turns on and off frequently. Crisis on Earth X it's a lot. I can't cover the whole event's good, bad, and questionable without taking an hour, so instead I'll say that there's some okay stuff for Kara and Alex, and some bad stuff too. Alex has a rebound with Sarah, because if there's two single WLWs in the multiverse, of course they're going to sleep together. The obligate nature of two gay people have to end up together aside, Kara sings in Barry and Iris's wedding, which is really nice. Melissa Benoist also plays a Kara Zor-El from Earth X, a version of Supergirl called Overgirl, that landed in Nazi-controlled territory and became co-leader of the new Reich. Her German accent is a little goofy, but it's nice to see Nazis roundly defeated. There's also a obligate Superman 2 reference of, "General, would you care to step outside?" Pretty good, but Krypton did it better. Episode 9 finally gives us Rain, and honestly there's some pretty cool stuff with her. She's genuinely scary, and it's only scarier that Samantha can't control it. Sure, visually it's very reminiscent of Death of Superman, but it really works. This is also the Christmas episode, and we get more of Lena and James being romantic with each other. I really dislike Lena, as I've made pretty obvious. But like I said in the first season, James is a good romantic lead. But how do you think fandom reacted to this? A whole lot of, "I'm not racist, but," followed by thinly veiled racist attacks on James, as well as Mikad. I'm not a part of the fandom by any stretch of the imagination, but man is it horrible how they treated this man. I don't care for this romance either, because James is ultimately sidelined in the future for Lena, ultimately becoming a supporting character to a supporting character. But before that even happened, the hate was out. I need something to cleanse my palate. Luckily, episode 10 is really, really good. Brainiac 5 makes his debut, portrayed by Jesse Rath. While this is, yet again, an example of a person of color playing an alien in face paint, in this season at least, he's perfect. Awkward but earnest, comedic but stoic, he, again in this season alone, never leans too far towards silly or serious. There's also a few hints of him being bi, which is not quite as much as we got in the comics, but, it's something. There's also a big fight scene between the three revived Legionnaires and Rain, set to Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer, and it's incredibly fun. Episode 11 is filler, with the only thing worth noting being Sarah Douglas, famous for playing Ursa in Superman 2. She has a role. It's cute. Well, and we learn that Rain is one of 3 Kryptonian world killers, and we briefly meet Julia Freeman, the second, at the end of the episode, whose powers awaken when she saves her friend. Episode 12 is a Lena-centered episode. Yay. At least her mother, Lillian, breaks out the Lexoskeleton, which looks really, really good, especially for the CW network. Lena's worried that she'll go to the dark side if Edge keeps harassing her, which is rich, as we'll get to later on. Episode 13 has the DEO capture Julia Freeman, known as Purity. The episode starts with the DEO entering a black woman's home and drawing their weapons on her, while she's, of course, unarmed. Despite being a good woman with friends and a life before being possessed by a world killer, just like Sam, Julia gets relatively little sympathy from our heroes. It's even revealed that Julia can see and hear everything that Purity is doing, like the sunken place in Get Out. Yeah. They pretend that there's a chance that they will free Julia, but spoilers, this goes nowhere. But hey, who cares about psychological horror and moral terror when we have Mon-El being conflicted about whether or not he wants to remain faithful to his wife? Episode 14 is also filler, but unlike episode 12, it's really good filler, even though it's about Wynn. Yes, Wynn, my least favorite character from the first 2 seasons, is more tolerable this season. He's still annoying to be sure, but he doesn't have a nice guy love interest, and this episode, focused on him, is really compelling. That is, admittedly, mostly due to the phenomenal acting of Laurie Metcalf, who plays his mother. Also phenomenal in this episode is Carl Lumbly, as Jean's dad Mirren is revealed to have dementia. For the rest of the season, this plotline is amazing, as we have a son struggling to care for his father and a father that worries about being a burden to his son. This makes the back half of the season bearable. This episode does have a sour point, though, with the least fun karaoke scene ever. Even more boring than the one in Mr. Robot, with only Lumbly's suspicious minds being entertaining. Episode 15 has Lena abduct Sam. She does eventually get Sam's consent to hold her after manipulating her into releasing Rain, but consent after the fact is not consent. But while this could be seen as imprisonment, something necessary for the safety of the public, Lena has absolutely no oversight, keeping Sam locked away in what is essentially her basement. Her reasoning is she wishes to cure Sam, but this is supervillain behavior, plain and simple. It's also not a great look to have a white woman illegally incarcerate a Latina woman and keep her daughter away from her, supposedly for her own protection. Episode 16 shows us the third world killer, Grace Parker/Pestilence. She's evil in both forms, and the Legion has devoted to kill her. They break Rain out of custody, meaning maybe it's not the best idea to try and keep a supervillain in your basement with no security or accountability. Episode 17 has the world killers coming together, ready to kill the world, I guess. Their motivation isn't exactly concrete. They're meant to be removing corruption, but it's ultimately as sensible as Thanos. They are admittedly scary, though. Lena helps the DEO, and James compromises his honor to defend her indefinite detainment self. This is part of why I don't really care for Lena and James as a couple. He doesn't make Lena more likable, but she makes him less. This episode also has the world killers decide that they need to kill their human personalities. Pestilence immediately kills Grace, but Julie and Sam resist. The DEO and Lena show up to restrain Sam, but Julia sacrifices herself to save the white women that detained her without trial. Ultimately, it's a fruitless sacrifice as, though she defeats Pestilence, Rain manages to escape, off to kill Ruby, which is, admittedly, again, really terrifying. Episode 18 has a cool reference to Superman the movie, and some okay stuff with Alex and Ruby, but we spend a lot of time with Kara and Lena feeling bad about not being able to trust each other after Lena reveals she made her own kryptonite. Not that Lena illegally detained a superpower individual leading to her escape and the deaths of individuals in the future, not that Kara said she would try to save Julia but ultimately failed on that promise, but that they aren't best pals anymore. Also, Imra and Mon-El separate, but who cares at this point. Episode 19 is our first and only James-centered episode of this season. James is being blackmailed into revealing that he is the Guardian, and he's scared, understandably. As a black man, James wouldn't be afforded the liberties and passes Supergirl and Superman have. This leads to some genuine fear that is played really well by Brooks. It also leads to him having to explain to his white girlfriend why he's scared. Him saying he doesn't feel safe unmasking isn't enough for her, she needs proof. And only after he tells a heartbreaking story of being arrested at the age of 7 for playing hide-and-seek in a hotel he was staying in, does she see that he has a point. His innocence and goodness have never been enough for police to see past the color of his skin. This is powerful stuff, so it sucks that it has to be framed in the lens of a privileged white woman slowly learning what racism is, despite being an adult. It also really illuminates just how white the show is. Yes, Jean and Mirren are portrayed by black actors, but James doesn't have anybody that knows what it's like on the show to be a black man. Not to be a man that is perceived as black or sometimes black, but actually black. This is something that even NewsRadio, a silly comedy show from the 90s, addresses. You shouldn't have to explain racism to your white friends or significant others. If they care about you, they should be willing to educate themselves. And you also shouldn't have to be the only black person in a group of people. Throughout the crisis, James doesn't have anybody to lean on that truly knows what he has to endure, and that's not an easy way to live life, for anybody. Obviously, I'm not saying that you shouldn't date outside of your race, that would be hypocritical of me, but what I'm saying is that if you're facing trouble with the police and your significant other, who happens to be white, tells you to get over it, you'll be fine, there's nothing to worry about, you need to evaluate if they truly are seeing you. Though Lena's ignorance, which is framed as idealism rather than what it truly is, white privilege, is ultimately overcome, her naivety is tone-deaf and childish, and shows that she's not nearly as interested in learning about racism as James is about learning about misogyny. Not seeing race is a privilege only white people are afforded, as people of color, and especially black people, go through life being judged solely on the color of their skin. For Lena to enter into a romantic relationship with a black man and not care to understand that is irresponsible at best. In fact, while her boyfriend is suffering with the moral dilemma of risking his own life or saving another, she's more interested in being angry at Supergirl for not liking her kryptonite project. And they keep dating after this episode, of course. This episode also, though, does have some really good stuff with the Martian family, once more, with Murren bonding with Ruby, and it's really sweet. Genuinely, the stuff with Jean and Murren deserves a better show. And for as incompetent as the show is when it comes to race, it's nice to see two black men giving stellar performances, and I've seen black fans commend the show for portraying their loving relationship seriously. Episode 20 sees Kara and Mon-El discover Argo City, which, like in the comics, survived the destruction of Krypton, but unlike in the comics, is still kicking. Kara's mom is alive and still in a position of power. Also on the Argo High Council is Selena. Oh no, more evil stuff. But finally, we get to meet the person behind Reign's rise to power. What is her true motivation for all of this carnage? Well, it's because she didn't want to worship the same god that the other Kryptonians did. Huh. Okay. We'll get to it. Episode 21 has a gun control subplot that is very toothless, including James discovering Lena has a gun that she is happy to use for self-defense. Red flags, man. But ultimately, Reign is separated from Sam, and she can reunite with Ruby. This is sweet, but it's still ultimately scary, as Sam begins to feel weak. There's some stuff where they pretend Supergirl might stay on Argo, but come on, the show's not called Law and Order DEO. Selena comes to Earth. Episode 22 is mostly built up to the finale, but once again we have aliens invading and almost destroying the Earth, which we'll get to in the next season. Murren is able to save the planet by sacrificing himself, though, leaving it up to our heroes to defeat Reign. Episode 23 is fairly lackluster as far as finales go. Nothing unexpected, including Sam using powers one last time to help fight Reign. Ultimately, the good guys win, a lot of them are mostly happy, and Mon-El win, Imra, Sam, Ruby, and Murren leave the show. Okay, that was a lot. So, was Supergirl Season 3 an improvement? In some ways, yes. Reign as herself, just by herself, is a fantastic villain. The idea that there's a side of you that you can't control without outside help that is able to harm the people you love is terrifying, and Sam's fears are far more understandable than whatever crap they were trying to pull with Kara's aunt in the first season. Furthermore, something I've made very clear in this review, Carl Lumbly's Murren was a gift, and because of it, if I had to rewatch any season of Supergirl, I would choose this one. The struggle of having an aging loved one begin to lose parts of their memory, and even their personality, is immensely relatable. As far as both Martians are concerned, this was a great season for them. But there's a lot of problems with the other villains. Julia is a woman in peril that our white heroes vow to rescue, but they never do, and rather than treat it like some great tragedy as they did when Kara's terrorist aunt died, it's brushed away. Pestilence is a spiteful doctor that views herself as better than everyone and is incredibly violent. Selena is a religious minority that wears a headscarf that turns to terrorism after she feels ostracized by her society's predilection for a different religion. Our villains are a black woman that is sacrificed for white women, a Chinese-American woman that is inexplicably hateful, supremacist, and cruel, and a brown South Asian woman meant to teach us to fear religious minorities. This is not good. And you might say, hey, it's just colorblind casting. And if that's the case, the casting director should do better. Not every role will carry the same connotations with different actors. Furthermore, it's not like you can blame this on the comics. Reign's fellow world killers in print are a saber-toothed cat lady, a lightning angel, and a poisonous reptilian. Oh man, don't even get me started on how they gave the actual dragon ladies powers to the East Asian woman. And in the cases where characters are actually people of color and not aliens, the showrunners haven't given me any reason to extend a benefit of a doubt. Repeated portrayal of homophobic parents of color, casting European Americans as Latinos, killing children of color to motivate white characters, sidelining black men for their white girlfriends. There's no reason to trust this show. And I'm not saying that you can't have villainesses of color, but there are good and bad ways to do everything. So, yes, in some ways, this is a great season of Supergirl. It's probably my favorite. In other ways, it's the least forgivable. If everything was unintentional, fine, but some things can be contributing to harmful stereotypes without even intending. Next season, however, they truly did recognize what they were doing. And boy, do I wish that they didn't.